Hello, my name is Mihai Cepoi. I'm the founder of Jobful, and I want to welcome you all to our very first podcast. Today, we have here with us Kristina Finseth, leading growth marketing at Interseller. Kristina's background in understanding the value of talent and how to generate processes that are people-centric is truly inspiring, and I'm super excited to have her as our very first speaker. Hey, Kristina, welcome to our podcast. It's a pleasure having you here.
Hey, Mahai, I'm really excited to be here and to also just be the first person that you're doing this with. I think I've got to set the bar high here, so I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm really excited to dig in and chat through some really good topics here.
Thank you so much. We're, as mentioned, so excited to have you here. Before we begin, tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, I'll try to condense this as much as possible. But basically, as Mahai kind of mentioned in the beginning here, I currently lead growth marketing at a recruiting enablement company called Interseller. We're a prospecting and outreach platform built for recruiting teams. But before that, I was actually a recruiting practitioner. So I worked in both HR and recruiting, went to school for HR. Both my undergrad and my graduate degree are in HR, surprisingly. And so I spent about the first 5-6 years of my career actually working in HR and recruiting in different organizations internally before I decided to make the switch to what I'll call the dark side, which is like going more to the HR tech side, the vendor side of the kind of the business or the industry. And so I've spent probably about the last 6 years now, just building a career and a place helping recruiters and HR folks just to become more efficient in their processes and do it better. So spent most of my time in marketing and sales, and I really enjoy what I do.
I wanted to ask you, how did you become interested in recruiting?
Yeah, I think I probably share a similar story with anyone else who has recruiting in their career history. I fell into it. It was not something that I just actively rose my hand and said, I choose recruiting. When I was finishing up my degree, just to give some context here, because we are human, right? And I know we're going to talk about human and human resources and how important that is. But I had just gotten out of the military. So I had served, almost 5 years in the military here in the US. And then I was a mom of two. I had like a 6-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. And so I was just starting kind of my career post-military. And so when I went back to school and I was graduating, I was like, oh man, all right, I'm going to do human resources because it's super broad. There's so many specialties within human resources that I was like, okay, I can find a passion here. And so it's funny because I actually took a very, very low paying internship with a very large third-party logistics company. And the internship that I did was really in HR. I was doing, employment audits and a bunch of like very HR generalist, at least that's what we would call it over here in the US, types of, I guess, tasks. And then about 6 weeks into my internship, they were like, we really enjoy having you here. We don't have a job in HR for you, but we do have a recruiting job for you. And I was like, well, duh, of course I'm going to take it. So I ended up working as a recruiting coordinator, really. And what I did, honestly, in my first year was just answer a recruiting hotline phone that people could call into and ask about opportunities. And so, it's really funny because when I look back, it wasn't really that exciting of a job, but I really enjoyed talking to a lot of different people and also just helping them navigate their career. It's kind of a powerful thing if you think about it. You're helping someone land their next step. So I think that's what made it so appealing to me. And while I'm not still actively in a recruiting position, I still help grow the team here. I still help other people grow their teams. And so I'm constantly kind of stuck in the recruiting side, and I like it.
You mentioned that was this was your very first role, right? It was an internship in HR, and then it was a role in answering the hotline for opportunities in general for candidates. I'm trying to understand how was the first impact, because when we look at business processes, and the very first impact might be a bit different than what we're expecting. Was there any difference between what you started learning and what you were expecting as working with talent?
I think for me, it was more about like I've always had people in mind and their best interest. And so, when I went into it, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know, what that was going to feel like. In fact, people still would hand deliver resumes or fax resumes in, which is kind of making me feel old right now when I say that. But I had no expectations. I just wanted to learn and do as much as I could to make people feel like they had the best experience possible when they were talking to someone at the company. So I took it very seriously because in my mind, I'm potentially the first interaction that they have with the company. And so I'm essentially the face of the company for some of these people. And so to me, it was really important to make sure that they had a really great first experience. I think beyond that, some of the things that I wasn't as in tune with is like, okay, what's next? Like what does the rest of the process look like? And that's where I became very curious and ended up doing more of that full cycle recruiting process during my time there and more into my career. But it's kind of like being in marketing for me now. When you bring in a lead, you want to kind of see its journey through to the end and make sure that it has this wonderful journey. It's the same process with recruiting. I got to a point where, okay, great, I'm bringing all of these people in and I'm getting them into our recruitment funnel. Now I want to see like what happens with the rest of the experience. Are they getting taken care of? Are they ultimately landing an opportunity here? And so I think there's just more of that curiosity factor too.
Yes. But in general, at least from my previous experiences, when we look at large enterprises or bigger organizations, it's more of a volume perspective and conversion rates in order to funnel the talent that they are looking for various positions than it is a customizable or a personalized experience for each candidate. Was that a conflict within the organization at any point of time when you were working there, or you had the time and the ability to take care of every single journey that you were tapping in?
Yeah, good question. I mean, no, we didn't have the ability to take care of every single person's candidate journey because just like you said, the types of roles that we were mostly recruiting for were high volume and what I would consider, I'm sure most recruiters will understand this terminology, evergreen requisitions. So you're never closing the job. So think about like warehouse workers or customer service reps where there might be some higher turnover and you're constantly hiring into those roles. You never really close it officially when you have job postings up. I think, just to kind of flip the script there, now looking back, I have a different perspective. That was my first role. You don't know what you don't know. I was there just to really understand and do the best job I could with what I could control. But I didn't have the same lens around candidate experience as I do now. And so the way I kind of think about scaling this is you're right. Those larger organizations are never going to be able to give a hand-holding experience to every single candidate, nor would you necessarily want to, right? And I know that's controversial, but you might not want to do that. But where you can do that is with the content that's on your site, with the way that your employer brand is coming through on your site and in other experiences that they're getting on their own versus being handheld through a process. And so I think there's ways to connect the dots there. And maybe we can dig into that in a little bit, but I think you can still make people feel special or included or feel like there's transparency and what to expect in the organization through other means than just having a face-to-face interaction like this.
What should the company do or an organization do in order to attract you as a professional? And what do you think would be the best interactions between you and a potential employer in order to be appealed and start that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to at the very, base level, you want to feel like, especially if they're trying to attract talent. Maybe they're not getting people coming in inbound through an application. I think that's where it's really important to have an outbound motion for candidate development, candidate attraction, candidate engagement, whatever you want to think about it as, to try to really attract those people. And I really think it comes down to knowing who you're really going after, right? Like this might be a fundamental issue, is just really understanding like, what do we need in this role? What does that profile potentially look like? And then crafting really nice, compelling messaging with follow-ups, right? Like I'll tell you very transparently, I'm very happy at Intercell. I'm not looking to leave, but I do get messages on LinkedIn from recruiters or from hiring managers that are asking about opportunities. And what's really interesting to me is more often than not, there couldn't be further misalignment with like what I've done, right? Like, hey, Kristina, I'm looking for someone to be an account executive for an insurance company. Do I look like look at my profile? Maha, you know me well enough. Like
Yeah.
I don't reflect someone who maybe wants to go. I'm a career recruiting industry, right? Like this has been my industry. Now, if someone was to reach out to me and say, hey, Kristina, I have this amazing opportunity to get on the forefront of leading growth marketing for indie market, and we're a recruiting tech company and blah, blah, blah. Now you've got my attention, but I'm probably going to tell you, hey, I'm happy to get on a call and understand more of what you're looking for, because I may have some referrals, right? So I think there's a way to approach things thoughtfully. So I think I also don't get messages back sometimes. And it's like, you spent all this time to reach out to me and you didn't. I wrote you back thoughtfully too, right? And hey, I might have some referrals, and then no one ever writes back. So I think there's some bad habits, unfortunately, that tend to overshadow the good habits that a lot of recruiters do have. Things like, sending one message and being done, right? Or posting and praying, right? Like we post a job and then we pray that the right people apply to it. But really, you've got to go out and hunt those people, much like you would in any profession, sales, marketing, recruiting, et cetera. And you've got to make them feel valued, and they have to know what's in it for them. If they're to join an organization like yours, or there's got to be a tie to mission and impact, So I think we could probably take that multiple places, but I'm kind of focusing on more of that. It's got to be an outbound motion. You can't just rely on inbound, just like in, again, marketing or sales. It's got to be a multi-channel approach. You've got to have great job postings that are inclusive in their language and are attracting the right people, but you've also got to have people who are willing to go out and find and surface the right talent and attract them in.
Some of the potential future colleagues for your organizations might not directly respond to a job. Maybe they're not actively looking to start a recruitment process, but at the same time, they might be curious about your organization or the challenges or the projects or everything that's happening over there. You can catch their attention without mentioning from the very first discussion that you're looking to hire that person. But going back to today, we're already 1 year in this pandemic, and I think it changed a lot. It changed how we work, where we work. It's still changing as we speak. And I wanted to ask you, considering the fact that you're growing your team, so you're hiring for your own team. What changes have you seen during the last year? What is the biggest impact that you were able to see?
Yeah, I think you kind of alluded to this in your question, but I think the biggest shift we've seen is we went from people pausing on their hiring because they didn't know what was going to happen, right? There was uncertainty, to now things have really rebounded for a lot of people, a lot of teams. Whether or not they're doing more with less headcount is a different story. I think there's still some teams that now need to scale back up on the recruiting side. And so I'm seeing more openings for larger companies that are hiring more dedicated sourcing teams and really trying to beef their teams back up is what we'll call it. But what I think is really the most interesting to me, and I've had some conversations around this with friends, with colleagues, with customers, is there's a widened talent pool, right? And so now what happens is the organizations that have shifted to remote first and are planning on staying remote first, they are going to be able to get good talent, right? Now, they might still have to pay for that talent depending on where they live, but they're going to be able to kind of widen their reach. And I think what's really interesting here at my company is, I was the first remote hire back in January of 2020. Yeah, 2020. And it was before COVID, right? So my leadership, my CEO, Steven, he was already kind of trying to figure out, like, can we have remote employees? Will that actually work? I don't know. I'm skeptical. He kind of had that mindset. And I was able to kind of proof that out. We hired, I think the next hire was a remote person as well. And then COVID happened. And it's interesting because we had our office in New York City. And in August of last year, our lease was up for renewal. And I remember my CEO always saying, who he also kind of owns the engineering team, right? He's an engineering guy. And he was like, I really want the engineering team to all be, in the same place. Like I want that. And now, like, just watching his own mindset shift, like, we're interviewing engineers that aren't local and there's no expectation that they're moving. So I think more people are either becoming open-minded to remote first, or there's a lot of companies that very early on became remote first. And so I think that's a really big shift. And candidates now can also have lives that they want. They don't have to live in San Francisco to work for a really great tech company. They can live somewhere that's more cost effective, or they can go and travel in an RV that's Wi-Fi enabled. You know what I mean? Whatever they want to do, and they can work at great companies. And so I think that's a huge shift that I'm loving seeing from my side.
Yeah, sounds amazing. And I think I read a couple of days ago an article specifically about that, the fact that we're taking down some borders one way or another, and that we're looking at opportunities and jobs and candidates from a global perspective, not only local or for a very specific location. I can't wait to see that how that's turning out. And that the very next question I have is about recruitment or talent acquisition as a business process. You mentioned that you've seen it from being called on a hotline to what is today. I wanted to ask you, looking at all this transformation, it's clear that there is some progress. But what's the role of technology in all this, and what would be the next generation sort of technology in order to address this ever-changing market?
Yeah, I love this question, and I'll try to be a little bit more high level about this because I feel like I'm very passionate about this question for many reasons. But I think what's really important before we even think about technology as part of the process, I think the mindset shift that needs to happen is first figuring out exactly what your process is from beginning to end, from a candidate's view, from a hiring manager's view, from a recruiter's view, right? And I'll tell you what, you'll figure out pretty quickly, like, where you're spending the most time, where your bottlenecks are, where you should be spending more time, but you don't have enough time to do it. And what really becomes very clear is, okay, here are our three main challenges, right? Maybe one of them is we don't have enough time to source candidates, right? Because we have so
Yeah.
much inbound, we're doing phone interviews. Or maybe one of those challenges is, um, you know, we just don't have enough time to send follow-ups. We're sending a message to candidates and then we're finding more candidates and sending another message. You know, we're not following up with some of the candidates that we really want to get in front of. Or it could be as simple as your application feels like a blood oath, right? Like, why do I have to give you as a candidate? Why do I have to create a username and password? Why do I need to, sign background check forms? We're not like, I'm just trying to raise my hand and say I'm interested. And so there's all these areas where people can fall off, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we don't want. We want people to not fall off, right? So I think where technology really comes into play is more in enablement. So instead of band-aiding or band-aiding, putting a band-aid, putting a band-aid on those processes with different pieces of tech that may or may not speak to one another, maybe siloed, it's going to hurt your process. You want to look at your process holistically and figure out, okay, if I do need multiple tech solutions, maybe one to help source top of funnel candidates and put them in front of me, maybe one to automate some messaging, whatever those things might be. Are those technologies like open, right? Like, do they have an API? Will I be able to get everything to talk and be smooth? Or, am I just kind of band-aiding certain things and that's just what we have to do? But I think it's more of enabling your process, not replacing your process, if that makes sense. So the goal here is to replace those components of your role that either you don't have time for or don't need a human element, like
Mhm.
updating your CRM or ATS. Like, you may not need a human to do that, right? We just need that data to go from point A to point B. So I think it's important to keep the human elements alive and try to get some of that mundane stuff automated. That's my high level overview.
I simply love it. I think it shows the fact that you've been having experiences in recruiting and in creating outbound strategies for sales, and it's applying all sorts of techniques from one to another. And I think it's great as a direction for a high level. We're getting to the end of our podcast, and I do have two more questions. One would be we've been addressing different personas or different roles when talking about talent acquisition. We've had discussions with the recruiters and identified a lot of pain points or things that can be optimized, as you mentioned, like automizing the emails or the communication with candidates or the collaboration with hiring managers, and the list goes on. Different discussion or touching on different objectives we had with HR leadership, and a bit even more differently, it was discussed with maybe the CFO or the CIO on process optimization or on cost optimization, and we saw within the same organization all this perspective that needed to be put together. So my question would be for you, regardless of the size of the organization, it can be a smaller size or a very, very large organization. How do you see the entire process of talent acquisition just working for a company? What would be the top changes that you would address, or from a consultancy perspective, what should an organization be looking for when they're looking to upgrade their talent acquisition process?
Yeah, that's a really, really tall question too, because I think there's a lot of elements there. First of all, I want to scale that back, and because you did talk about, the fact that there are different personas and there are different stakeholders that are involved in that process, and they're not all looking at it equally, right? Like, your
Yeah.
CFO is not looking at is I'm not going to speak for all CFOs, but they probably aren't thinking about like, great, is that going to be less of a burden on our recruiters and candidates? They're thinking about, how much is this going to cost the organization? What's the ROI? What are we going to see? gained from this investment, et cetera. They're just looking at it through different lenses. And so the more that you can, I think at the very base level, I like to do journey mapping with organizations. And so, you know, yeah, you want to optimize the process for the recruiters, but you also want to make sure you're optimizing that process for the candidates, the hiring manager, the talent leader that needs to be able to report on key initiatives, right? Whether it's diversity hiring, which is really big right now. They may want to just see, how is the team performing, right? And so I think what's really important is to sit down, and it does take time if you haven't done it before, but really journey map at each level of stakeholder. What do candidates care about? What are they thinking and feeling? What actions do they take? What matters to them? Recruiters, same thing. What matters most to them? Hiring managers, what matters most to them? Talent leaders, CHRO, whatever you want to call that, what matters most to them? And it's the same with your CFO, your CEO, anyone in the C-suite. The important part is that you understand what matters to each of those components and get those questions answered as you're going through any kind of evaluation process with vendors, with whoever, right? Make sure that each one of those stakeholders feels comfortable. I don't know if that fully answers your question. I'm going to stop there because I'm sure you have stuff to add or you want to ask an additional question, but I just think it's important to understand what all of those people need to be successful in making a decision, and how it's going to impact their day to day. That it's important. It shouldn't just be about improving candidates, improving recruiters. It's not a siloed thing. It should be a one holistic view there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think over time, the HR department was seen as a support department. And I think especially seeing how 2020 went, more and more people in leadership teams understood the value and importance of talent for the success of that organizations. I think there's still a gap over there, not everywhere. I've been meeting HR leaders that are having a very active role in how they conduct their entire organization from a business perspective from their role as HR. But in most cases, I think there's a gap. And I think over time, as organizations, we've looked at profitability and sales and financial as the critical part or most important part. Then we added marketing because we needed customers as super important. I hope now it's the time that we all understand the importance of talent. And I think for this to really happen all across the market, it's important for HR leaders to step up and become part of that discussion about talent as a critical component of the success of that business. Sorry.
I want to say one thing.
Sure.
Because you kind of said it, but I'm going to say it very, very bluntly. If an organization is listening to this and you're either in HR or you're in a leadership role or the C-suite, HR needs a seat at the table, the C-suite table, like wholeheartedly. If you are not connecting people to process and business objectives, that's all I'm going to say. I'll leave it there, but you get where I'm going with that. So
yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much. And you're 100% right. And I've seen the differences within organizations that started listening to HR leadership in order to drive their business. But I think that's a topic that we can address on a totally new and different podcast, and it needs time for itself. The last question that I have for you, Kristina, more than a question, I'd say, do you have any advices? You've been in talent acquisition, in recruitment. You're now leading growth perspective for our organization. For the people who are working in the field, in HR in general, but maybe more specifically in talent acquisition, what would be one or two takeaways for them to absorb and put into practice starting today?
Yeah, I'll give two very specific pieces of advice. There's so much I can give, so feel free to reach out and we can talk about it. But one is go through your process. And what I mean is pretend like you're a candidate and go through the recruitment process that you have into play from beginning to end and really, really take a hard look at where you can make that better. I think that's number one, right? Sometimes you don't know because you're not going through it. And a lot of times the processes or the application itself, things like that are built with the recruiter and HR person in mind, not the candidate. And so I think it's important just to go through that and really understand like where could we improve, right? And also don't be afraid to speak up and say, hey, I think we could be doing this, right? I think what's important is not pointing out problems and then just glaring at them. It's pointing out problems and then offering solutions. That's always been my kind of motto. I'm never going to say, hey, Mihai, our application process sucks, right? I'm never going to say that to you and then not say, hey, but here are two things I think we could do in the next week or two that would improve that, right? We have candidates dropping off here, and here's what I think we can do to decrease that. Like, I think those things are important. Have a voice on your team, show that you can add value, right? Even if it's not your job, right? Or your responsibility. I think the other piece of advice there, right now the market, there's a lot of people applying for opportunities that aren't just copy paste. And what I mean by that is, we're seeing a lot of non-traditional or non-linear backgrounds applying for different roles. Some of them are just applying because they need something, right? But some of them are applying and there is a story to tell about why they want that next move, which might not be very clear cut to people. So I think what's really important is if you can take the time to pick maybe 3 to 5 candidates, that you let them tell you the story behind why they're applying, you may realize and be able to connect some dots that you wouldn't get off of a resume. And so I think my big thing is like fight for candidates that deserve an opportunity, but a hiring manager might have a hard time accepting on paper. And be willing to have conversations with certain people just to better understand their background, their story, their history.
As we're reaching the end, just wanted to thank you, Kristina, for accepting our invitation and congratulate you for being the very first person joining our podcast. I'm looking forward to our next discussion, maybe in 6 months or 1 year, to see out of what we've been discussing and predicting and looking to change in talent acquisition space, what's happening and how things are turning out. Thank you again and keep rocking.
Awesome. Thank you.